Prelude to Revolution Paper Slide by Ryan Walsh, Cody Walsh, and Mike Volpe.
All right, so first off, we have the Navigation Act of 1651. This is basically saying that imported goods had to arrive in England and her colonies in English ships. So if the colonists wanted to get any imported goods, it had to go on English ships, no exceptions. And also colonies could only export goods in English ships. So everything they had to do with their goods had to be transported by English ships. All right, next is the salutary neglect. This is the unofficial British policy lenient, and it was basically meant to keep colonists loyal to Great Britain. And the name came from Edmund Burke, and this actual whole thing came to an end in 1763. So 1763, the salutary neglect was over. Next, we have the Proclamation of 1763, or the Proclamation Line. It was issued by King George III, who is a tyrant and not good to the colonies, not fair. And to stop conflict between natives and colonists was its purpose, because they were fighting a lot, so he wanted to put a stop to that. Colonists weren't allowed to do anything west of the Appalachian Mountains. So here, as you see in the picture, they weren't allowed to cross over to the west side of the Appalachian Mountains and have conflict with the Native Americans. All right, Sugar Act. So this was a whole big deal on putting a tax on certain sugars, and one of the key parts was molasses. There was a sales tax on it, and this was in 1764. And the reason to it was because Britain was in debt from the war, and Britain put a tax on sugars and molasses, as I said earlier, to raise revenue.
The Sons of Liberty, they were a group of political dissents that were formed in British colonies during the early days of the American Revolution. It was started up in Boston, Massachusetts, and they formed to protest the passage of the Stamp Act. Basically, they were colonists that did not approve of the Stamp Act. They thought it was unconstitutional, and that it shouldn't be an act. Next, we have the Stamp Act. It was the first internal tax levied directly on American colonists by the British government. The colonists thought the act was unconstitutional, as I said earlier, and they started a mob violence to intimidate factors. Basically, the Stamp Act was a tax on products, and the colonists were not happy about this, and it was passed by the British government. And yeah, the colonists revolted, and they did not think it was right. Next, we have the Quartering Act. This act outlining the locations and conditions in which British soldiers to find room and board in American colonies. It also required the colonies to have British soldiers. So basically, it was saying that colonists, their homes had to have a place for the British soldiers to live in during the war. And then next is the Boston Massacre, which was the killing of 5 colonists by British regulars on March 5th, 1770. Even though the killing was not a huge impact because of the 5 deaths, it led to a revolt, and the colonists were not happy about the British government. So, yeah.
During the Gaspee Affair, the Sons of Liberty group attacked and set fire to the ship. British government threatened to send the American preparatories for trial in England, but no arrests were made. So basically, the ship was set on fire, and no one really got in trouble for it. Next, we have the Tea Act. It was a British law passed by Parliament of Great Britain on May 10th. It was designed to bail out the British East India Company and expand the company's monopoly on tea trade to all British colonies. So basically, they made money off this act. Now we have the Boston Tea Party. American patriots dumped 342 chests of tea into the Boston Harbor, which belonged to the British East India Company. These people were dressed as Indians, and it's symbolic because it showed British how American colonists were willing to speak their freedom. So basically, all this tea was poured into the harbor, and they didn't get them back. Now we have the Intolerable Act. Harsh laws passed by British Parliament. British Parliament punished the American colonists for the Boston Tea Party and other protests. So the Intolerable Act is related to the Boston Tea Party because they punished them.
All right, last but not least, we have the First Continental Congress. 12 out of the 13 colonies met from September 5th to October 26th, at Carpenter's Hall in Philadelphia in the year 1774. Every colony except for Georgia was there because they were fighting a small battle and they couldn't make it. But basically, the colonists were just trying to discuss how mad they were that they were being treated misfairly, and they were more mad than basically Shawnee when they lost to Camden Catholic in football. So that's why they had the Continental Congress. And that is our last slide. Thank you very much. I'm Cody Walsh,
Ryan Walsh.
Michael Volpe.
and that's our paper slide project.